Copperlid, the ex-wife of Nagatha and a guy that loves to boss people around. Cyanake, pessimistic, sulky, greedy and aggressive. Slitheref, a chill dude who wants to make your fights fair and keep every rule strictly enforced. They're a pretty cool trio of recolours from Yokai Watch 1 and one of the only yokai to be in a recolor trio since 1. The others being Boohoo, Slush, Suspicione, Wiglin, Ilu, Hee-Hee-Heel and technically Castellius, but there are 4 of them. But why did level 5 see them as a yokai design worthy of copying twice? Is it just down to looks, or do they have some merit in competitive? Let's look at that, and we'll start with the worst one. We have to unfortunately start this video out with the least viable of these 3 snakes, Cyanake. Cyanake has a really good speed stat. His spirit is also alright. What? That's the extent of my praise for Cyanake in competitive. I really think he is one of the worst yokai in the whole game. He has 0 redeeming qualities other than having slightly decent stats. How many negatives are there? Let's see. No skill, average bulk, water attribute which isn't amazing, confusion in spirit, incredibly niche and pretty useless ultimate. God, he's terrible. Please, if you've taken nothing else from this video, I implore you to never ever look at Cyanake for your team. He's not as backwards terrible as Wood Option, and his stats aren't as useless as something like Reverse Set, but he is pretty awful. If he had a good ultimate or a skill at all, he wouldn't be sent to the depths of my personal unviable list, but there he lays. Let's move on before I offend the very real and not fake Cyanake fanbase. I don't consider Slitheref great, but he is definitely alright and better than our last disaster. There are 2 things that make him better than his B-rank brother in blue, and that is the fact that he actually has a useful skill and somewhat of a usable ultimate. His skill prevents him from loafing, which can be pretty nice, but it isn't fantastic. It just means that he can be a bit more consistent, while if he had something like Intimidation, you would kind of be helping out the other team. Making one of your offensive yokai stop loafing is pretty good, all things considered. But what if his skill was different? In Yokai Watch 1, Slitheref had a unique skill that we haven't seen since, called No Items Allowed. You can fill in the blanks on what it does. They removed this skill going into Yokai Watch 2, which means they probably didn't want this in online battles. But would it have actually been good? I'm not sure. It removes your items as well as your opponents, so it's messing you both up. This would have made Slitheref the ultimate gimmicky anti-meta pick. He's alright stats, is A rank, is slippery which doesn't have an amazing unity bonus, and a fine ultimate. He has a 20% strength debuff to your opponent's yokai, which won't always do anything. It's at least better than Cyanake removing stat buffs, I guess. There's actually a lot worse than other anti-meta picks like Pteropod or Professor Plumage, and he'd probably see very little play. Disabling all your items as well as your opponents just doesn't make for a fun game. Shielding Soul and Stealth Soul are very important and a key part of the game's meta, and removing the option to use them for everyone would just make games a lot less enjoyable. So how does Slitheref fare in his current state? Well, his strength is pretty good, he has an average base power, attack, and his speed is alright. His ultimate is pretty niche but can come in handy sometimes to match with physical attack routines. His spirit is really bad, just being a small speed debuff. Not the most useful thing in the world, but can stop stuff in its tracks sometimes. Mythical Bangle might actually be an option on him, since his attack has good accuracy and he has decent speed. I would still prefer Stealth Soul or a Guard Break Soul though. That was Slitheref, so now let's move on to the final one, and the only one that's actually viable, Copperlid. Copperlid has a lot going for him, so let's start with his most niche, but still great quality, his skill. His skill just reduces fire damage taken by all your allies. Like I mentioned in the Caden video, this is a pretty specific effect that won't always come into play. However, Fire Watch Out does have one thing going for it that makes it a really nice tool to have. It checks solar armor pretty well. If you have a good wall that can take magic damage like Walden, Janasequa or Krunger, pairing them with Copperlid's skill will make them practically immune to the fire damage they take from solar. But this isn't the only thing Copperlid has going for him. His stats are pretty solid, for a B rank. They're very similar to Slitheref's, but he trades having slightly worse strength for slightly better speed. This is fine, as Copperlid is B rank, so you can fit him onto teams infinitely easier than Slitheref. Slitheref only wishes he could be as good as Copperlid, and the main part of that is his moveset. He has the same attack and is similarly mid in spirit, but his ultimate is a 20% strength buff to your allies. It charges really fast as well. Samrail is a better user of this ultimate as he's brave and has better support in spirit, but Copperlid can still work on a lot of teams. He's slippery, and those are generally hard unities to finish, as slippery is such a varied tribe. You could use him with anything really, and he has a more usable skill than Samrail because of the previous mentioned neutering of literally the best yokai in the game. You could even use Krunger's family, which are also slippery, to finish the unity, as they're one of the strongest low rank tanks in the entire game. They're all great in their own way and fit into different archetypes. Their skill doubles the effects of guard. It doubles it, so you take a quarter damage instead of half damage. So if you give them a shielding soul, they can take attacks extremely well. Magic attackers quiver in their boots when they see a pot snake. Attackers quiver in their boots when they see a pot snake, even. And Copperlid can help them out by lowering the opponent's fire damage. Soul Armor hates pot snakes anyway, and Copperlid makes them even harder to wall break for the alpha of competitive. Crudenure pairs the best with him, since his ultimate is physical, so Copperlid can boost it further. Your first thought might be to use Charge Soul on him, and that can work, but his bulk isn't great, so you can't keep him out for long. Instead, I recommend a Drojan Soul for your Copperlid. There's this whole gem I haven't talked about, but I can assure you it's a very good one. It speeds up Soul Meter charge for the holder. This lets Copperlid stay subbed while charging relatively quickly and still lowering fire damage. He doesn't need to be out unlike Samriel, since Samriel is good support without this ultimate thanks to his all-up in spirit. Copperlid, however, can actually make use of his ultimate himself thanks to his good attack and strength stat. He can even charge his ultimate faster if you keep him out rather than if you sub him. And I just thought of this. You could use him with Krunder to boost his ultimate, or you could use him with Urnaconda instead since Urna has an inspiriting ultimate. Yokai's ultimate gets more charge when in the hidden Inspirited Yokai, and they also drop life and spirit orbs for extra team support, even more ultimate charge. Damn, I'm good. So what have we learned today? Cyanake is horrific, Slitheref is mid, and Copperlid is great. More people should use Copperlid. Are you a Chad Copperlid user? Let me know in the comments and have a good day.